I spent $35,000 on my self-development. So just imagine me at the time making $12 an hour and making the decision to put more than a year's salary of investment, most of that taken out in a loan with interest and not good interest, to make a real change in my life. And this was a serious thing I was super, super committed to. I looked at my life and I realized that I was being held back because I could not figure out internally how to get rid of anxiety, how to be more confident, because I wasn't truly competent in certain areas. And I wanted to figure out how to make this change. And so I found a mentor, somebody who was already doing the things I wanted to do, and just learned from him. I said, I'm gonna pay money. I'm gonna come travel with you. I ended up helping him teach a lot of these programs. We traveled to 26 countries. It was a great experience. And what I figured out in doing this was that there are so many things that people do not do, that I see every single day people mess up, probably including you, that you could fix very easily if you were committed and dedicated. If you take two guys in the exact same scenario, one of them puts down 35 grand, one of them puts down 0 grand. They're both making commitments to changing their life. Only difference is leverage. And let's also assume that these guys aren't making a ton of money. So if one of the guys was making $1 million a year, then that's really not a big deal for him to spend that money. On the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of leverage. It's not a lot of commitment. And so just by the mere fact of being scared of losing that money, that in and of itself motivates you. So it activates something inside of you that we all have called loss aversion. We're much more afraid of loss than we are happy to gain something. So if you had somebody who's like, hey, I'm going to give you 2 grand if you do this, versus somebody said, hey, you're going to lose 2 grand if you don't do this, people are much more motivated by loss aversion, by losing. So now that we know that alone, the leverage alone, is probably one of the biggest things that you can do to change your life now. You saw it recently in the alcohol video. I've started to implement this, where I gave my friend $1,000. I said, I'm not going to drink for 6 months, and I didn't. Because if I did, I would lose that money. And now I've activated in myself loss aversion. I don't want to lose. And so that refocuses your reticular activation system, right? Which is just your focus, right? So a good example of that is when you want to go buy a new car. You're like, I want to go buy a new car. You want to go get, a little white Toyota, okay? And so you go around driving in somebody else's car, wherever you're going, and now your RAS, your reticular activation system, is hyper-focused. Every time, it's almost like that car is everywhere. If you have ever tried to buy a new car, you'll notice this. And you've been looking at cars, you'll notice this. Oh, wow, I keep seeing these cars all over the place. And the reality was that they were there before, but you just didn't notice them because we have a very selective focus. There's so many things in the world that you just can't focus on everything. You can only focus on certain things at a time. So our perception is always based on, our prior experiences and our prior knowledge. And so in this case, what you're doing is you're putting your RAS solely focused on figuring out a solution to that issue in which you're dealing with. So for me, the issue that I was dealing with was anxiety, was a lack of confidence. I wasn't good with women. So I was learning a lot about women during this process and dating, figuring that whole thing out, which is a whole can of worms. And I was figuring out internally how to make myself into a person who was more competent, who was basically, I didn't change myself so much as I let out the person that was already there, that I was too afraid to let out. And everybody has this. Everybody has this wall that they put up where they're scared to express themselves. They're scared to put themselves out there because maybe at some point they got hurt. They put their hand a little too close to the stove, too close to the fire, and they got burnt. And so they decided, you know what, I'm going to recoil. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to preserve who I am. And what most people do, because we're very tribal in nature, we're really, I'd say, built for communities that are very small. And so the thought of getting outcasted is very scary. People are very scared to get outcasted. And so in this case, when you're trying to put yourself out there, you have a risk. You have a risk of getting outcasted if you're too crazy, if you're too weird, if you're too out there. And so that's why everybody in general, so when we socialize, we tend to feel what the environment and the energy is, and we try to adapt to that. Now, the reality is that can overcorrect. That can overcorrect to a point where now you're completely going with the flow of the environment, of what people are saying and doing on a macro level as well as a micro level. And then you become someone who's just part of that system, who's just part of that little matrix, if you will. And that is where I was as a kid. That's where I was as a teenager. That's where I was in my early 20s. And it was enormously difficult to get out of. What I call this is being a people pleaser. So I was a people pleaser. I said yes. I didn't say no. And so when someone asked me to hang out that I didn't really want to spend time with, I would feel bad. I'd say, I'll just hang out with them. I'll just do that. And so I always put other people's needs in front of my own. Now, there's some cases where you have to do that. Like, for instance, if you're in a relationship and you want to compromise, then that makes sense. But if it's not somebody in your close circle and you're always compromising yourself, what you notice is people will start to take advantage of it. They notice, oh, this guy, he's not in it for himself. He's just trying to fit in. He wants to be liked. He wants to be appreciated. How can I take advantage of that? How can I abuse that? And this happens subtly. I don't even think people are aware of this. It's more subconscious. When you don't respect yourself enough to stand up for yourself, people follow your lead. And so this is really what I learned was, it doesn't mean you got to go be a dick and you have to go take control over everything, but it means that, hey, you have to respect yourself. You have to have some self-love. You have to understand that you are somebody who's worth something. And it's very easy when you can tie that to something that's actually tangible. If you're not doing that, you just get delusional. And so the next key part here that I'm going to talk about in the next section is having integrity. Having integrity is enormous. And the only way that you can have sustainable integrity is to live your life through a set of principles. So if you know what your North Star is and where you're going, and that's the number one priority in your life, is you accomplishing, like for a guy, let's say, it's just going to be following your path. Okay, for a guy, it has to be following your path. It can't be some girl that you're into. It can't be some side tangent thing. It's like you have to figure out what it is that you want to be doing with your life. What it is, how are you going to be resourceful, and how are you going to solve problems? And figure out, what am I good at? That is the path you want to go down, because that will give you the most progress quickly, which will give you competence, which will then give you confidence in that. Now, it is a matter of perspective as well, okay? So there are a lot of people that are very competent, but they're not confident. And why is that? They've decided to detach for whatever reason. They don't have enough vitamin D, or they got a gut issue, or they got they got bad friends, they got bad influences in their life. They've been watching too much depressing stuff.
I still love you.
For me, honestly, it was I was listening to a lot of depressing music, and I didn't have the right influences in my life, and I wasn't progressing. I was playing too many video games, and I was not competent in certain areas of my life that I wanted to be, and I couldn't figure out how to. And so part of my journey was figuring out how to be more competent, right? So the main one I wanted to learn was how to communicate better, How can I be more effective in communication? And this was the North Star for me. I was like, I have to figure this out. This is absolutely paramount. And it's paramount to where I'm going in my path because I'm doing sales, right? I learned sales. I learned how to communicate. I managed people prior to that. I manage people now. And in order to be excellent at that, which is always something you're striving for, I wouldn't ever say that I'm excellent at anything. I'd always say that, I'm always working to be excellent because there's a certain amount of humility that has to be implemented so that you can continue to grow. Okay. Now, in order to get to that place, I realized that this is absolutely, insanely important to everybody's life, including yours. Shaking the camera. The camera can't even handle it. Because if you don't figure out how to communicate, we're human beings. This is the planet, the world, the currency, the systems, the businesses, everything revolves around communication. You see this in social media. You see this in every single aspect of your life. We even get the most satisfaction in life from friends. Not even really from our significant others, but from friends. People who are the least depressed have more friends. People who live longer and have better memories have more friends. Why? Because we're social creatures. At heart, we're social creatures. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an introvert, what are you thinking to yourself? Well, this isn't for me. I couldn't do this. You can't change. I can't do this. Well, I'll tell you this. I was extremely introverted when I was a young kid. When I was younger, I would play video games. I didn't want to be around anybody. I wanted my alone time. I just wanted to be, at my computer that I built when I was 13. I just wanted to be there playing video games. And this is something that most people don't realize that they can break out of. So if you're an introvert and you're very largely inside your head, this is something that's adaptable. You can actually push the limits. I took a personality test recently, and I was 98th percentile extrovert. Okay. And I will guarantee you, if I had taken that personality test 5-6 years ago, wouldn't have scored nearly that high at all because I've changed my mentality. Now, how did this happen? This isn't woo-woo. This is actually, this is very scientific. Okay. There's a very scientific reason that this happened. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. So whatever you're most scared of, let's say in this case, you're scared of public speaking, and you go out and you do public speaking and you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, you reorient your RAS that we talked about earlier, your reticular activation system, towards enjoying it and the presentation of it away from where you were at previously, which was the fear of performing it. Now, why? Why does this work? It's the same reason they'll give people who are afraid of, spiders, they'll put a spider in a jar and they'll have to hang around with the spider, right? And it's just like conditioning them to not be so afraid of this issue. Now, my girlfriend, knows a lot about this issue. She's in school for this, for these types of things. And I'll tell you, there's so much of this happening outside of that world, in the psychology world and in other industries and different areas of self-development especially, that it just happens. The reason it works because it just comes up naturally. Nobody went and studied this. Nobody put a label on it. But when you go out and you just put yourself out there, you start to realize that putting yourself outside of your comfort zone is the most important thing that you can do in your life. Because if you're not progressing and reaching out into that potential, that unknown that you're scared of, then you're never truly living. You're never truly satisfied. This is why people go to drinking. This is why people go to drugs. This is why people can't focus on things. This is why people get bored, because they're never truly alive. They're never truly stepping into this discomfort where they have to challenge themselves and grow. And so the summary of this experience for me was adopting a growth mindset. And what I mean by that is reaching outside your comfort zone, things you're scared of, things you can't do, you don't think you can do. You put boundaries on yourself. And so what it is it's breaking past those limiting beliefs into the unknown and organizing, as Jordan Peterson would say, organizing the chaos, making order out of chaos, okay? And that is the path, as you would call it. That is the journey. That's what you have to do to avoid falling into addiction, to avoid falling into that black hole of despair where you're not getting where you want to be. Corona just happened. 5 months. And how are you doing? Have you been thriving and prospering during this, or have you been sinking down into lower depths? Because if you haven't been progressing and finding opportunity, this is a great time to find opportunity. So many people are doing really well, and a lot of people aren't. So I don't want to make light of that. But if you're not, you have an option. You have a realization that you can come to right now, where you can realize, look, this is malleable. Your situation is malleable. Why? Because your thoughts are malleable. Okay, what does that mean? If you change your thoughts and you change your intention, you change your RAS, okay? Change your focus. Now that you've changed your focus, now you can, and it's real, there's leverage, there's commitment, you're serious. Now you're at a place of empowerment. Now you can start to take control of your life, because if you focus entirely on the things that aren't going well in your life, then you will continue to get things that are not going well in your life. And if you're focused entirely on things that are going well, then you can get a little delusional as well. You need to be balanced. Okay, so what does this look like? Whenever you are reaching yourself outside of potential, into that discomfort, that outside of the comfort zone. For me, it was, doing public speaking. I was terrified of it. Most people are extremely terrified of it. And I ended up public speaking about 35 times to hundreds of people, and got to the point where I really enjoyed it. I actually look forward to doing public speaking because it gives me this adrenaline. It gives me this excitement. And it's pure self-expression. It's amazing. It's an amazing feeling that I would have never had if I hadn't reached out into that discomfort and that fear, really. And so facing your fears. Okay. So if you're able to do this and reach out into your discomfort, your unknown, let's say, at the end, what do you get? What's the real result here? You get a feeling of accomplishment. Okay, you get a feeling of accomplishment. From there, this gives you confidence, because you get competent with something that you never thought you could do. And you told yourself, I can't do this, I can't do this. You finally did it. At that point, you proved yourself wrong. You get out of delusional negativity, and you get into objective reality. There's some things you do well, there's some things you don't do well. And what I've noticed actually with some people in this sphere, in this world, what they've done is they've actually course corrected too much. So they went from depression, they got competent with something, they continued on, and then they went into like borderline narcissism because they just kept giving themselves positive reinforcement for everything. Now, I'll admit that I actually do a healthy amount of positive reinforcement, even to things that probably aren't even that deserved, mainly because I think it's funny, but it can definitely get to an unhealthy amount if you're not at least somewhat humble about it, if you're not somewhat objective about your faults. If you think you're perfect and everything's absolutely on point, then you're probably a narcissist. But at the same time, if you're somebody who thinks that you can't do anything right, and that you're not good enough, then, well, you got to get some more positive reinforcement. So the way to do that is you got to reach outside the comfort zone, reach into something. Think about one thing right now that you're scared of doing and commit to doing that. How do you commit to doing it? You get leverage. Go on Facebook, tell everybody, go on Instagram, whatever. Say, hey, I'm committing to this. I'm going to do this. Hold me accountable. The main one that I've found that works for me is put down money. Say, hey, I'm going to give you $1,000 if I don't do this. I'll give you $50 if I don't wake up at this time in the morning. I'll give you this. I'll give you this. And now the money starts to work for you versus against you, right? Where you have all of these things coming down on you. You have loss aversion. You have that starts to outweigh the fear. The fear now becomes a smaller issue. Now the loss aversion of not losing that money becomes something you're more afraid of than just doing the thing that you are already afraid of. So I hope this helps. I went real heady, real deep with this. There's plenty more that I could share, but this is definitely something that I want everybody to experience. It's just that liberating feeling of pushing past what you think you're capable of. And you'll never get to that point. You'll never reach that potential unless you put yourself in such an uncomfortable place and push past it. That will never happen on its own. It won't happen without external leverage. Okay. Now, leverage can also happen in different scenarios. It does not always have to be money. It could also be you have enough pain, let's say with trauma, where you want to change. This happens often with the people who are the most present to the moment are often the people with the most trauma, who were the most unconscious, and they got to such a crazy point where they had to snap out of it and wake up. Can't snap today. Snap out of it and wake up. That is leverage. So I hope you guys had some good takeaways from this. Really enjoyed this video, and there'll be more to come. Please like and subscribe. It would be so huge if you could just like this video, subscribe to this video, to this channel, and let me know your thoughts. Shoot me some comments. Let me know what you got out of this. I want to hear what lessons you learned, if you got anything. And if not, let me know that too. Say, hey, you know what? I didn't get anything out of this video. Maybe try this, maybe try this. I'm always happy to hear that feedback. Just like I said in this video, that's always something I'm open to. And you can't just have everything be positive. You also have to get the objective feedback, the criticism, to be able to improve, right? Otherwise you get stagnant and then you're back in your new comfort zone. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you next time and wish you the best.